I was 22, fresh out of college, and trying to make ends meet by picking up odd jobs around town. I lived in a quiet suburb that was the epitome of normalcy. Rows of neatly trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, and friendly neighbors who waved at each other as they walked their dogs. It was the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened, or so I thought. It all started when I saw the ad for a dog-sitting job on a local community board. Seeking dog sitter for a weekend. Large house, well-behaved golden retriever. $300 for 2 days. The pay was too good to pass up, especially for a broke graduate like me. I called the number on the ad, and a man named Mr. Calhoun answered. His voice was deep and calm, with a slight rasp that suggested he was older. "I'm glad you called," he said. "We're heading out of town this weekend, and we need someone to look after Buddy. Are you experienced with dogs?" "Yes," I lied. I'd never owned a dog, but how hard could it be? Feed them, take them for a walk, play fetch, easy money. Mr. Calhoun gave me his address and asked me to come by Friday evening to meet Buddy and get familiar with the house. When Friday rolled around, I drove out to the address he'd given me. The Calhoun residence was a sprawling 2-story house on the edge of town, surrounded by dense woods. It was the kind of place that looked charming in daylight but would probably feel eerie at night. When I pulled up, Mr. Calhoun greeted me at the door. He was tall, probably in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and sharp blue eyes. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, looking every bit the picture of a friendly suburban dad. "Thanks for coming," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Come on in. I'll introduce you to Buddy." Buddy turned out to be a big, goofy golden retriever with a wagging tail and a tongue that seemed too large for his mouth. He was as friendly as they come, immediately plopping his head into my lap when I sat down. "He's an easy dog," Mr. Calhoun said. "Just feed him twice a day, take him for a walk in the morning and evening, and make sure he doesn't chew on the furniture. He likes to sleep in the den, but he'll probably follow you around most of the time." Mrs. Calhoun appeared then, a petite woman with graying blonde hair and a warm smile. She handed me a set of keys and walked me through the house, pointing out where the dog food was stored and which doors should stay locked. "We'll be back Sunday evening," she said. "Feel free to help yourself to anything in the fridge." After they left, I settled into the routine of taking care of Buddy. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, but I chalked it up to being alone in such a large space. That first night, I made myself a sandwich, watched TV in the living room, and let Buddy curl up at my feet. Around 10 p.m., I decided to call it a night. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard it, a faint creak, like the sound of a floorboard bending under weight. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Buddy, who had been trotting up the stairs ahead of me, stopped and turned, his ears perked up. Probably just the house settling, I muttered to myself, though my voice sounded unconvincing even to my own ears. I continued up to the guest bedroom, where I was staying, and locked the door behind me. Buddy hopped onto the bed and promptly fell asleep, but I lay awake for hours, straining to hear any other sounds. Eventually, exhaustion took over and I drifted off. The next morning, everything seemed normal. I fed Buddy, took him for a walk around the neighborhood, and spent the afternoon reading on the couch. By the time evening rolled around, I'd almost convinced myself that the creak I'd heard the night before was nothing. But then, around 11 p.m., I heard it again. This time, it was louder and more distinct. A series of deliberate footsteps coming from downstairs. My stomach dropped. Buddy, who had been dozing at the foot of the bed, immediately perked up, his ears swiveling toward the door. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I grabbed my phone and crept toward the door, pressing my ear against it. The footsteps continued, moving from the living room toward the kitchen. My hands were shaking as I dialed Mr. Calhoun's number. It rang twice before going to voicemail. "Hi, this is Mr. Calhoun. Leave a message, and I'll get back to you." I hung up without leaving a message. My mind raced. Should I call the police? Was I overreacting? Maybe it was just my imagination running wild. But then I heard something that erased any doubt. The sound of a chair scraping against the tile floor in the kitchen. I decided I couldn't stay locked in the bedroom. If someone was in the house, I needed to know. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the bedside table and slowly opened the door. Buddy followed me, his tail low and his body tense. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the moonlight streaming through the windows. I tiptoed down the stairs, my flashlight held tightly in one hand, my phone in the other. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I paused, listening. The house was silent again. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the living room and into the kitchen. Nothing seemed out of place. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. No response. I stepped into the kitchen, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. The chair that had been pushed back from the table was exactly where I'd left it earlier. Nothing seemed amiss, and then I saw it. The back door, which I'd locked before going to bed, was slightly ajar. My blood ran cold. Someone had been inside the house. I slammed the door shut and locked it again, double-checking to make sure it was secure. Then I turned to Buddy, who was staring intently at the basement door. His body was rigid, his tail completely still. "What is it, boy?" I whispered. Buddy let out a low growl, his gaze fixed on the door. My stomach churned. I checked the basement earlier that day when Mrs. Calhoun showed me around. It was mostly unfinished, with a washer and dryer, some storage boxes, and a door leading to a small utility room. I hesitated, every instinct telling me not to go down there. But I couldn't ignore the possibility that someone might still be in the house. I turned the knob and opened the basement door, peering down the wooden steps. The beam of my flashlight revealed nothing but shadows. "Stay here," I whispered to Buddy, though he ignored me and followed as I descended the stairs. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, and the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. I swept the flashlight around the room, my pulse racing. Nothing seemed out of place. Then I heard it, a faint shuffling sound coming from the utility room. I froze, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run. But I forced myself to move forward, one trembling step at a time. When I reached the utility room door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the knob. The shuffling sound had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I took a deep breath and flung the door open, shining my flashlight inside. The room was empty, just a small space with a water heater and some cleaning supplies. I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me. But then I noticed something that made my heart stop. A set of muddy footprints leading from the utility room back up the stairs. Footprints that hadn't been there before. I bolted up the stairs, Buddy at my heels, and locked myself in the guest bedroom. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely dial 911. When the dispatcher answered, I quickly explained the situation, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "Stay on the line," she said. "Officers are on their way." I sat on the bed, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, my eyes fixed on the door. Buddy growled softly, his gaze never leaving the hallway. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Moments later, there was a knock at the door. "Police!" a voice called out. I unlocked the bedroom door and ran downstairs to let them in. 2 officers entered, their hands on their holstered weapons. I explained what had happened, and they began searching the house. They found him in the basement, hiding behind the water heater. A man in his late 40s, disheveled and wild-eyed. He was unarmed but resisted arrest, forcing the officers to wrestle him to the ground. As they dragged him out of the house, he turned to look at me, a chilling smile spreading across his face. "I'll see you again," he said, his voice low and menacing. The police assured me he wouldn't be able to hurt me, but their words did little to calm my nerves. I couldn't shake the image of his face, the way he'd smiled at me as if he knew something I didn't. I was 22, just out of college, scraping together what little I could to stay afloat. My life wasn't glamorous. Part-time gigs, instant noodles, and a leaky apartment in a quiet, uneventful town. When I saw the dog-sitting ad tacked to the bulletin board at my local grocery store, I thought I'd struck gold. Weekend dog-sitting needed. $350. Large house. Friendly dog. The ad read, along with a phone number scrawled in neat handwriting. I didn't hesitate to call. The man who answered, Mr. Harris, sounded polite with a slight southern drawl. He explained that he and his wife would be out of town for a family emergency and needed someone to watch over their German Shepherd, Duke. You'll find Duke a joy to be around. Smart, obedient, he said, his voice warm. And don't worry, the house has everything you need. We agreed to meet Friday evening so he could show me around. When I arrived, I found the Harris residence perched at the edge of town, an imposing two-story farmhouse surrounded by overgrown fields. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow that made the house look almost picturesque. Mr. Harris greeted me at the door, a tall, wiry man with a friendly but slightly forced smile. His wife, a quiet woman with sharp eyes, gave me a quick tour of the house. Duke was indeed a lovely dog, big, muscular, and friendly, with a thick coat of fur that begged to be petted. Duke likes to stick close to people, Mrs. Harris said. If he barks, pay attention. He doesn't bark without reason. Her words stuck with me as they left later that evening, their car rumbling down the long driveway. I stood in the quiet house with Duke sitting faithfully by my side. The house was cozy but old, with creaky floorboards and heavy wooden furniture. I settled on the couch with a book, Duke lying at my feet. The first night was uneventful. Duke and I explored the property in the morning, walking along the edge of the fields. The place was isolated. The nearest neighbor was a good half-mile away. It was peaceful, almost too quiet, but I didn't mind. That evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of purple, I locked the doors and settled in again. Around 10 p.m., as I was flipping through TV channels, Duke suddenly lifted his head. His ears perked up, and he let out a low, guttural growl. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, turning the volume down. Duke stood up, his eyes fixed on the hallway leading to the back of the house. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed my phone and stood, my ears straining for any sound. At first, there was nothing, just the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then, I heard it, a soft shuffling sound, like someone dragging their feet across the wooden floor. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. The noise stopped. Duke growled again, inching closer to the hallway. I followed, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The hallway was dark, the overhead light casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. I checked each room, my pulse racing, but found nothing. The doors were locked, the windows secure. "Must be my imagination," I muttered, though the knot in my stomach said otherwise. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next day, I tried to brush it off as nerves. I busied myself with chores and played fetch with Duke in the yard. By evening, I was feeling more relaxed, but then it happened again. Around 11 p.m., as I was preparing to head to bed, Duke started growling. This time it was louder, more insistent. He was staring at the basement door. "Not again," I whispered, fear creeping up my spine. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and approached the door. Duke followed closely, his growls deep and threatening. The basement door was slightly ajar. I could have sworn I'd closed it earlier. My hand trembled as I pushed it open, shining the flashlight down the wooden steps. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a cluttered basement filled with old furniture and storage boxes. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice echoing off the walls. No answer. I stepped down cautiously, the stairs creaking under my weight. Duke stayed at my side, his body tense. The basement was cold, the air heavy with the smell of damp wood. I scanned the room with my flashlight, but nothing seemed out of place. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard it, a faint rustling sound coming from behind a stack of boxes. My blood ran cold. Duke barked loudly, his hackles raised. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. For a moment there was silence. Then a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, disheveled and dirty, his eyes wild. He was holding a crowbar. "Get out of here," I yelled, backing up toward the stairs. The man didn't say a word. He just stared at me, a chilling grin spreading across his face. Duke lunged forward, barking ferociously. The man flinched but didn't retreat. I turned and bolted up the stairs, Duke right behind me. I slammed the basement door shut and locked it, my heart pounding. Grabbing my phone, I dialed 911, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped it. "There's someone in the house," I told the dispatcher. "He's in the basement. Please hurry." The minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive. I could hear the man banging on the basement door, trying to break through. Duke stood guard, growling and barking nonstop. Finally, I saw the red and blue lights flashing outside. I ran to the door and threw it open, relief washing over me as two officers rushed inside. I pointed them toward the basement, and they descended with their weapons drawn. The man put up a fight, but they managed to subdue him. As they dragged him out of the house, he turned to look at me, his face twisted into a sinister smile. "You should have stayed out of it," he hissed. "This isn't over." The police assured me he wouldn't be able to harm me, but his words haunted me. The Harris family was shocked and grateful when they returned the next day. They thanked me profusely and insisted on giving me extra pay, but no amount of money could erase the fear that lingered. The man was later identified as a drifter with a history of breaking and entering. He was convicted and sentenced to prison, but his chilling smile and cryptic words stayed with me. To this day, I can't walk into a basement without feeling a shiver of dread, a reminder that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who walk among us. It was supposed to be an easy gig. A few days of dog sitting in a well-to-do neighborhood, a little cash to help with rent, and a chance to escape the monotony of my small apartment. I found the job online, advertised on a neighborhood forum. Experienced dog sitter needed for the weekend. $500. Quiet house in a safe area. Please contact Mr. Donovan at the number below. The offer was too good to pass up. I called the number immediately, and Mr. Donovan answered. He had a calm, soothing voice and explained that his dog, Max, was a gentle golden retriever. He and his wife were heading out of town for a business retreat and needed someone reliable to watch over Max and the house. The house, he said, was in a secluded part of town, a sprawling two-story colonial at the end of a long driveway surrounded by dense woods. Despite the isolation, the paycheck and the opportunity to spend time with a dog sounded perfect. We agreed to meet Friday evening so I could familiarize myself with the house and Max's routine. When I arrived, the setting sun cast long shadows across the property. The house was as grand as Mr. Donovan described, with tall windows, a wraparound porch, and a well-manicured lawn. Mr. Donovan greeted me at the door, a tall, lean man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and a friendly smile. His wife, a petite woman with a soft voice, introduced herself briefly before excusing herself to pack. Max bounded up to me, tail wagging and tongue lolling, immediately putting me at ease. He was a lovable dog, exactly as described, and seemed delighted by my presence. Mr. Donovan walked me through the house, explaining the layout, where to find food and supplies, and the basic rules. Keep the doors locked, let Max out in the fenced backyard, and make myself at home. There's nothing to worry about out here, he assured me. It's quiet, no neighbors for miles, so it's just you and Max. The Donovans left just as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving me alone in the massive house. Max settled at my feet as I curled up on the plush couch in the living room. The first night was peaceful, almost serene. I marveled at how quiet it was. No distant hum of traffic, no shouting neighbors, just the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Felt like a mini vacation. The next day passed uneventfully. Max and I explored the property, and I spent the afternoon reading in the sunlit kitchen. By evening, I had settled into a comfortable routine. Dinner, a quick walk with Max, and then some TV before bed. Around 11 p.m., Just as I was about to turn in, Max began growling. It was low and steady, a sound that sent an involuntary chill down my spine. He was staring at the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked, moving to check it out. The door was locked, and the backyard was bathed in pale moonlight. First, I saw nothing unusual. But then, just as I was about to turn away, I caught a flicker of movement at the tree line. A figure. Someone was standing just beyond the fence, half hidden in the shadows. My heart leapt into my throat. I quickly closed the curtains and grabbed my phone. I debated whether to call the police, but the figure hadn't done anything yet. Instead, I double-checked the locks on every door and window before retreating upstairs with Max close on my heels. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the image of that figure lurking in the shadows. The next day, I told myself it must have been a hunter or a hiker who wandered too close to the property. Still, I kept Max inside and stayed alert. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, but I brushed it off as paranoia. That night, everything escalated. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by Max barking furiously. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the landing at the top of the stairs. Max was at the front door, growling and barking with his fur bristling. I flipped on the porch light and peeked through the peephole. No one was there. I tried to calm Max down, but he wouldn't stop growling. That's when I heard it. The faint sound of footsteps on the porch. My stomach dropped. Whoever it was, they were deliberately staying out of sight. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering my address to the dispatcher as my heart pounded in my chest. "We're sending officers to your location now," the dispatcher said. "Stay on the line." As I waited, the footsteps grew louder, circling the house. Max barked louder, his growls turning into snarls. I backed up into the kitchen, clutching a knife I'd grabbed from the counter. Then, the back door rattled, as if someone was testing the lock. "Someone's trying to get in," I whispered to the dispatcher, my voice trembling. "Stay where you are. Officers are on their way." The rattling stopped, but the silence that followed was somehow worse. I could feel my pulse in my ears as I strained to hear any sound. Then, a loud crash echoed from the living room. Someone had shattered a window. Max charged toward the noise, barking wildly. I followed cautiously, gripping the knife tightly. When I peered around the corner, I saw a man climbing through the broken window. He was tall and lanky, dressed in dark clothing, with a ski mask obscuring his face. "Get out!" I screamed, holding the knife in front of me. The man froze for a moment, his eyes locking onto mine. Then, without a word, he lunged at me. Max intercepted him, sinking his teeth into the man's arm. The intruder yelled in pain, struggling to shake Max off. I took the opportunity to run toward the front door, fumbling with the locks as adrenaline coursed through me. Just as I got the door open, I heard sirens in the distance. The man shoved Max aside and bolted back through the broken window, disappearing into the woods. Moments later, 2 police cars pulled up, their lights flashing. The officers searched the property but couldn't find the intruder. They assured me they'd patrol the area and promised to keep me updated. They boarded up the broken window and took my statement, but by the time they left, it was nearly dawn. I didn't sleep that night. Max stayed by my side, his presence the only thing keeping me sane. The Donovans returned the next evening, horrified by what had happened. They thanked me profusely and insisted on paying me double, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. A week later, the police called to inform me they'd caught the man. He was a drifter with a long criminal record, including burglary and assault. When they searched his belongings, they found a notebook filled with detailed notes about the Donovan's house, including the days they'd be away. The knowledge that he'd been planning this for weeks made my skin crawl. Even though he was behind bars, I couldn't forget the way he'd looked at me through the ski mask or the sound of his footsteps circling the house. To this day, I lock every door and window before bed and keep a knife within arm's reach. Some experiences change you forever, and that weekend was one of them. What started as an easy gig turned into a nightmare, a reminder that danger can strike when you least expect it, and that sometimes The safest seeming places can hide the darkest threats.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for supporting this channel. It truly means a lot. As a broke college student editing all my videos on an Android phone, it takes a lot of effort to bring these stories to life. A laptop would help me create better content faster, so if you enjoy my work, please subscribe and share. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you so much.